It's extremely nice to be back in this beautiful room, in this beautiful building, in this beautiful city. And I have followed the development of the European University since almost the very beginning, and I have been, very impressed by the quality of students and all the activities that go on here. So it's very, very nice to be back. So what I'm going to talk about, and thank you for your generous introduction. So what I'm going to talk about is this report. There are some copies here later for you if you want. It's a joint work between Russian researchers and international researchers and colleagues of mine at the EBRD. And it's been going on for about a year and a half. The purpose was to sort of take a sort of global grip on the issue of diversification. And I will try to convince you that even though diversification has been sort of talked about a lot in this country, even going back into Soviet times, even Brezhnev talked about the need for diversification in Russia. Unfortunately, not much has happened, and what we're going to try to do is to indicate some. Is this connected, or is this your? No. Yeah, okay. I thought it was no. I will be recorded. It's very good. Thank you. So this issue of diversification is one that is going to be with Russia for many years to come. And what we have tried to do is to look at the various components of a policy that could try to help Russia get out of its very strong dependence on natural resources. So here is just a share of oil and gas in selected economic indicators. You see this is on exports in 97 and in 2011. If you look at value of oil at international prices, percentage of GDP, and if you look at it in terms of revenues in the federal budget, and you can see in all those three dimensions the significance of oil has. And of course this is in value terms, but even when you do look at in real terms, so take into account that some of this is driven by the oil price, you can see that still when you look at it in real terms, minerals, chemicals dominate, and if you include metals too, you see that it's very dominant in exports for Russia. I don't think this surprises you. But what I will try to do is to ask the question, why is there so little diversification, and what policies can we try to implement? And we're using a whole range of new available data. Perhaps the most important set is the BEEPS. I don't know if you're familiar with the BEEPS. It's a business environment survey. We go to managers in Russia, or now in the rest of Europe as well, and actually thanks to collaboration with the World Bank, we do this globally, so you can look at Russia in how it compares to other countries. But what we do for the first time now, this year, is that we have data also at the regional level. So we have representative data for 37 regions in Russia, and that's the first time we have that data. So it's looking at how do managers perceive the business environment in the different regions in Russia. And then we also have the data that Zephyr in Moscow has collected on administrative barriers to small businesses in 20 regions. It's a sort of longitudinal survey of these barriers. And finally, there is a household survey. It's a sort of combined household survey and attitudinal survey called Life in Transition. Some of you may have come across it. It was one of the first things that I had the pleasure of doing when I came to my current job, was to try to get a sense of what has happened to perceptions as a result of transition. How is the interplay between these perceptions and policies and economic behavior of agents? And finally, as I said, this is a collaboration with a number of Russian researchers, most of whom you would know the name of. So there are a number of reasons why you want to diversify, because if you become too dependent on anything, but particularly on natural resources, the volatility will hurt you. So you don't want to have all these fluctuations driven by price volatility, and that's an important reason for why you want to diversify. You want to broaden the skill base. So at the moment, a lot of focus is on building skills around these natural resources. You have very good universities tied to the gas and oil sector, for example, and you want to spread that skill base more broadly. And here's just to look at different countries, and you have on the horizontal axis GDP per capita, so there's some measure of how rich they are, and on the vertical axis you have what we call a Herfindahl index of export concentration. So it's trying to measure how concentrated is your exports. And you can see there's sort of, a lot of, when you are quite poor, there's a lot of variation, but as you grow, you become as you grow richer, become less concentrated, and then there's a few exceptions in these very rich countries that have very little but oil or natural resources. But there is also a very important reason to diversify. It's because it will help you broaden and diversify and improve your institutions. So I'm thinking here about things that have to do with competition, with corporate governance, and all those issues that are strongly connected to the diversification. But maybe most importantly, when you look at Russia and Russia's future, you think of Russia's future as being the abundance of oil and gas. But actually, when you look at it, it's not like that. First of all, a lot of what you need to discover or need to explore and produce is no longer very easy to get at. And here is just the value of produced oil per capita. You see that Russia actually does not have that much oil at the moment, and it's a question of how long will it be able to sustain its growth using oil and gas. And so you can think of course, diversification at the national level. You can also think about it at the regional level. It's probably not an objective for each region to become diversified, but you want different regions to build industries that on a national scale creates diversification. And we're trying to measure the we try to estimate the regional specialization, and it turns out that has changed very little over the last 8 or 9 years. And when we look at this, actually more specialized regions tend to grow faster. So, but as I said, the economy can become diversified even if regions specialize. But what is clear is for Russia's economy to really diversify, many regions will have to develop new capabilities. Capabilities being here particularly around the skills and availability of technology. So here is an index of employment concentration in 2002, and if you so the darker here, the less concentrated, and if you go back and forth, here's 2010, you see there's very little change. So sorry. So if here's 2002, here's 2010, you can hardly notice the change. So this is an issue of the employment concentration. So what we're going to argue is that diversification comes really through discovery. So it's the idea that there are many actors in the economy that tries to discover new production opportunities. And of course, these production opportunities and entrepreneurial opportunities, they don't come just like that. You have to look for them, and there's some costs associated with this. And so, of course, policies can help to make it easier to get into new industries, to provide research that's available more generally, that helps companies take in the new ideas and entrepreneurs. Of course, funding is a big issue. If you can if you can get funding more easily, that's a good thing. And here, policies can help, but policies can also impede. And I will come back to that. Some policies may actually be counterproductive. A policy that sort of sets out to promote diversification or sets out to promote innovation could actually be detrimental because it undermines the natural process of discovery. What you clearly want to do is to promote entry and exit, and very importantly, exit of firms. So you want old firms that are no longer productive or competitive, you want them to be closed down. And you want to promote growth, allow small and medium-sized enterprises to become middle-sized and eventually large. So to do this, you need to improve the business environment both at national and regional levels. And the argument we're going to make is that the fact, when you look at Russia, there is huge diversity across regions. And that is something that can be exploited. That this is sort of suggesting that even though it's very hard, it seems, to move along some of these reforms at the national level, it seems still to be possible to do it at the regional level. So we try to see what kind of policies can regions implement and what kind of policies can the government implement to promote this kind of competition among regions and encourage regions to move ahead. So one very important thing is to widen the skill base. And here it's important to raise both the supply of skills but also the quality of skills. So it's obvious to you as you are building your own skills that there are different skill levels, and people who are well-trained will be very important for promoting innovation and diversification. But as I will speak about shortly, innovation finance is only one element of this. There are also many other components that influence innovation. And foreign firms are particularly important. They bring in innovation. If you look at globally, what makes companies able to export and then eventually to invest overseas is that they often have superior technology. So if we look at Russia, can we? So Russia, of course, there was not a lot of entry and exit in Soviet times, but actually, in the early transition, entry and exit in Russia increased quite a lot. But if you compare 98 to 99 in terms of entry rates in Russia, and 2005, 2006, and 2007, 2008, actually entry rates have come down quite a bit, and now they are really rather low by international standards, and then certainly by transition standards they are low. You can also see that there is this is the Russian regions looking at the average investment risk during 1996 to 2008 on the horizontal axis and average entry rate. And you can see that as average investment risk increases, the entry rate comes down. And one very important feature in Russia, and something that is absolutely critical for diversification, is to not only have the large firms and not only have the small firms, but also having these middle-sized firms. And it's typically small firms that are allowed to grow big. And we know that the Russian economy, because of the legacy, was dominated by large firms. Then there was a very large inflow of small firms in the 90s and the early 2000s. But very few of these firms have been allowed or been able to grow to middle-sized firms. And this is, you can see that the dark here in these circles is the black or very dark blue these are the medium size. So you can see there's very little in terms of turnover, in terms of employment, in terms of investment generated in these middle-sized firms. So part of the challenge and part of the sort of solution is to see how can one promote these kind of middle-sized firms. And of course, we know that this is from a number of studies that this has something to do with regulation, that often there's sort of a glass ceiling, that once you break through that glass ceiling, you become visible to bureaucrats and others who may want to extract things from you. But it's also about growing to more complex structure, developing management skills to run larger companies, getting maybe the transition from an entrepreneur to a professional manager. So all those things are associated with developing medium-sized companies. It's also a fact in Russia that very few firms export. It's around 3% compared to 15% in the US and France. And I described the lower level of entry, but also the lower level of competition, particularly in high value-added sectors. So all those things are hurtful for diversification. And if you look at the different, these are different obstacles that managers perceive. And again, this is this BEEPS survey that I talked about that for the first time now can be done at the regional levels. We're going to look at some of the regional data, but here is these different constraints and how they have developed over time. So, well, high tax rates is of course something that you go anywhere in the world, companies will tell you that the high tax rates is an issue. It's true also in Russia, even though tax rates are quite low for companies here. You can see it improved a lot when you have these early tax reforms, but then it has sort of stabilized. But if you look at some other things here, so political instability has decreased as an obstacle. Access to financings also have to decreased as an obstacle. Corruption is about the same. Tax administration very significantly increased. So it's not all dark, but it's still, these are very significant obstacles, it seems. Here's how they look in 2012, and again, tax rates, let's leave that aside, but you see corruption, access to skilled workers, and access to finance, and also political instability are the more serious obstacles that managers see. Here is, I'm sorry, you're not meant to read this, it's just to give you an impression. One thing that I emphasized before, that there's a lot of diversity across regions, and here is what we have. The dark here is the most serious constraint, the blue is the second most serious, and the light blue is the third most serious constraint as perceived by managers. And one thing that's striking here is that there's actually no region that has the same top three. I don't think so. I looked at it quickly. It seems like there's no region that has the same three obstacles identified by managers. There's a lot of variation, suggesting that there's also a lot of room for improvement. But you can see that here, corruption, access to finance, workforce skills. So these, we order them in the, so the more you are to the left from your, where you are, the more severe is the constraints. So corruption, access to finance, workforce skills are the most serious ones. So now we can look within individual regions. So this is Primorsky regions, and here, so you know, this is Far East. I've never been there, but that's where they organized recently the APEC Forum, this Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, and they did a lot of infrastructure investment. And you can actually see that infrastructure does not seem to be a huge constraint in Primorsky, and I'll show you another slide in a minute that suggests that this may be related to all the investments that were made in preparation for this forum. And by the way, the black line here is the average in Russia. So you see certain things like infrastructure, so transport, electricity doesn't seem to be a problem. Even workforce skills doesn't seem to be a serious problem. But the informal sector, access to land, and as you probably know, a lot of land in Primorsky Krai is about military land. So it's apparently having access to land is a big issue there. Trade regulation and customs also, and business licensing. So this we can do now at each regional, at the level of each of these 37 regions. Here is Khabarovsk region, which is of course next door, and here you can see that transport, electricity are very serious and also much higher than the rest of Russia. Telecoms is a problem, crime is a problem, trade regulation and customs. So yes, suggesting two regions that are close to each other have very different patterns, and that suggests again that there is room for improvement, even though things may not have to change a lot at the central level. And here's just looking at, so we try to distinguish by collecting some information of innovation, and you can see that innovative firms are more constrained than another firm. This is difference between innovating firms and non-innovating firms in the perception of business environment. And universally, across all the constraints, it seems like these innovating firms are more severe, feel these constraints more severely. So let me say a little bit about the policy environment. And so far I've just really described to you how, when you try to look at the degree of diversification, you try to look at how businesses perceive the business environment, and that is in our mind, and I think I may have been able to convince you that this is a very important part of trying to achieve diversification. So now we're going to look at the policy environment and how that has changed over time, and what are the key factors there. So, as you know, in the early 2000s there were a number, this was, with the GREF program, there were a number of reforms trying to address particularly the situation for small and medium-sized firms. So the first Putin administration, they tried to reduce licenses. They had established this, what they call one-stop shop for firm registration. So the idea was that you didn't have to go to a lot of different authorities. You went to one place. You had fewer inspections. So inspections was a very important way to get bribes. So bureaucrats can come from many different authorities and ask to do a fire inspection. I think you know from this building about fire inspections. So this is something that can be very arbitrary, and certainly many companies were suffering from this. In the early 2000s, they tried to do something about this. They also forced authorities to keep records of violations of these different codes that were established. But actually, and that's a lot of work, Ekaterina Zhuravskaya from New Economic School has looked at this over time, followed for I think altogether 10 years or so, what happened. And you can see a lot of variation across regions in terms of the enforcement. And then she has done in a contribution, so that's underlying the report, looked at what explains this variation. Why is it that some regions were enforcing these new reforms and these new rules differently? And what she finds is that where there are better institutions, trying to, there are different ways of measuring this, but trying to look at to what extent is rule of law respected, to what extent do managers identify strong institutions. She finds that those regions, and the regions that were more transparent in terms of what they did, they had also better enforcement of these laws. So again, if you want to try to push this sort of regional agenda, trying to look at, what was it that made certain regions more successful in enforcement than others, the clue may be in here. So when we summarize, and underneath this report there are a large number of background papers addressing different aspects of the business environment and different aspects of the broader policy environment. And the conclusion is from all these papers that there's really need for a very comprehensive reform of business environment, and you need to work on several constraints. You cannot just look at one constraint when you try to improve the conditions for firm growth. And enforcement, again, I described this variation across regions. We need better enforcement and more transparency of government. So e-government, all these initiatives that have been taken, we argue are very important and try to make sure that this happens also at the regional level. What seems to be very important, and it comes out in the BEEPS survey, is export barriers. So VAT, refunds, improving customs is still a very important area. And so what you should focus on differs from region to region. So what there is now, as you probably heard about, there are these roadmaps established at the federal level and by policy area, but what we argue is that these need to be supplemented now with similar roadmaps at the regional level. So these are descriptions of where should reforms go in this particular region, and who is responsible for what, and so on, and a timetable. Actually, we have been quite impressed with how the Ministry of Economic Development and the Agency for Strategic Initiatives have tried to work on these roadmaps at the national level, and we think that implementing this at the regional level will be a big step forward. So that was about the business environment. I'm going to now speak more about skills, and again, you know a lot about that, being in a very good university. This is, if you're going to try to diversify Russia, it's not really possible without changing the skill sets, and you need new skills, new capabilities, because existing skills have, to a large extent, been formed around the current existing industries, and when you need to move into new industries, you need new skills. And in particular, and I'll show you some data on this, management skills is a big issue in Russia, and we have done work comparing Russia to other countries in Eastern Europe, but also globally, and I'll show you here. So here is this is a sort of revolutionizing technique of trying to measure how good is management, and it's two researchers, one at the London School of Economics and one at Stanford, and they have developed this technique where they get managers to describe what they do in different areas, and then they compare it to sort of state of the art. And you can see here Russia is actually, at the very bottom in terms of the countries that they have studied. So so this is clearly an issue, and it's particular. It seems to be an issue in higher value-added industries. So on the left-hand graph there, you have the difference in management scores between Russia and other countries, and you see that when it comes to lower value-added, it's not so big a difference. But when you look at higher value-added, and if you look at the distribution of management scores, what is important to understand that in Russia you have actually quite a few very good companies. But the problem is that there are a lot of companies that are much less productive. So this is basically the further you are to the right, the more productive you are. The dark line there is Germany. So this is how distribution of firms with different management skills look in Germany. And then you can look at Russia and you see that there are indeed some very large or some very good companies here. So these are Russia, but you see there's also a lot of companies here in the tail. So it's sort of what we call a fat tail of less productive companies. So if one could do something, probably it's, this is where Russia's big potential is addressing these firms with poorer management skills. So what is it that improves management? Well, here competition clearly is an important driver. So if you improve competition, you increase competition, and we saw that competition has increased in the beginning in Russia, but has during the 2000s really not developed very well, and actually has deteriorated. So if you can find ways of increasing competition, you will also improve management. And this is very strong coming out both of Russian data, but also of global data. Again, I spoke about large foreign firms. They have better management typically and better skills. That's why they're able to grow across boundaries, and inviting them will help you bring in the best management practice. You need to develop capital markets. Good management is often driven by corporate governance, and corporate governance comes ultimately from the capital markets. So if you can help those develop, then you can get shareholders to push for better management. You want to reduce barriers to trade, because companies that export, and again it's sort of obvious, but it seems that exports can help improve management and productivity. This is, of course, you can say it's more successful companies that export, but it also works the other way around, that once companies can export, they can spread their R&D, their investments in improved management on a larger production base, and that helps develop management. Finally, there are a number of initiatives in Russia, and you have the School of Management here in St. Petersburg. You have Skolkovo in outside Moscow. I think these are well-intended initiatives, but you really need to work on a very broad base to improve management. And really we haven't seen, in the results at least, that we get, we don't see a lot of improvements in management at the moment. Here is another type of skill. This is more closely tied to education, and you're sure you follow this in the media. Russia comes relatively well compared to countries at the same level of development, but Russia improved a little bit in the early 2000s, but has then decreased since between 2006 and 2009. This is the PISA. This is really measuring secondary schools, not universities. So it's 16-year-olds that are asked around the world, and you can see South Korea is at the very top. So it's Finland and Japan. There's also, so it's not only about management skills and about sort of university skills and the level of skills, but it's also the match between skills and what you asked for. So a big problem was that, of course, Russia had a fantastic tradition in terms of many excellent high schools, excellent universities, particularly in the sciences and in the mathematics and so on. But of course, some of that has, as you saw, not done so well. But particularly what's important, of course, this match between the skills of people coming out of universities and what was requested by business, and particularly, of course, by the most innovative sectors. So that skill match, or mismatch, is very important. And we did actually, or two of the authors behind the report did a study in Russia. They looked at the costs of locating high-skilled personnel across different regions, and they found that generally it was extremely costly to locate high-skilled personnel. So if you can improve the search process, a lot is gained. And you can also see from the results of our work that the lack of access to skills depress productivity. You saw earlier that the more productive firms are more concerned about the access to skills, and that should be expected. But so if you can improve access to skills, you can also improve innovation. You help the best companies. And of course, you know that there's quite a lot of immigration going on in Russia, but very little in the high-skill segment. So this is mostly in low skills, and we think that if Russia could develop a more sort of productive immigration policy to try to steer immigration more towards high-skill professions, that would help. Or at least supplement the current migration with some high skills or two. And what is very clear also from surveys we did, companies don't recruit high-skilled jobs abroad. And I said migration flows are very small. So what can you do to improve the skill base? A lot of this is I guess, obvious. You need education reforms that emphasize outcomes rather than inputs, instead of measuring, how many teachers you have and or how much resources you have across different departments and so on. What you really should focus on is the type of PISA studies and measuring this over time and across regions. More effective decentralization, the way it works today in Russia, and you tell me what your impression is, but the decentralization that is going on at the moment is not very effective, and we need more allowance for experimentation and variation across the system. We need to have more diversity in terms of providers. This is a very important trend globally, and to try to encourage different interests to move into education and provide and allow students to choose. You need to experiment with management, governance and funding of education institutions. You need broader autonomy with curriculum standards, so allow schools to do their own, design their own education. Finland, that has been consistently a good performer, has done this very well, to allow teachers to develop their own curriculum to fit their circumstances. Vocational training is very important, and to do this joint with industry. We see, for example, in Kaluga, that has attracted a lot of automotive investment. We also see now that they are building training centers, they are attracting suppliers, they're building sort of critical mass in the automotive sector, and they train people to work in that sector, and that is something that we think should be done on a much broader basis. We need better regulation by public agencies it's about getting better regulation by public agencies of educational institutions. It's more here also more active use of migration policies to reduce skill gaps. Let me finally say something about innovation. And so we looked at the management skills, we looked at education and those kind of skills, and we looked at sort of mismatch of skills between what's produced in universities and what companies need. So one thing, and of course this is very closely tied to innovation. Innovation is about bringing in new companies, new ideas in existing companies, and for a long time this has been a cornerstone of Russian economic policy, certainly since the GREF program, but I would argue even earlier. And unfortunately, as I showed you in the very beginning, the results are very limited. And there are a number of reasons for this. I think weak property rights, not a strong sense that you can, if you find out something new or you develop something new, it's not clear that you will be very well protected in this country. There's also sort of weak complementary investment. So sometimes you discover something, you need to also invest around that particular innovation, and that seems difficult to do in Russia. Human capital, skill shortages. If you look at what the state has done in terms of R&D, unfortunately, I was part of a review that the government did late last year, and the evidence is unfortunately quite poor on these many investments in state to do R&D. And also company-led innovation is still quite limited. So what needs to be done? Well, there needs to be a stronger link between research and what markets and customers want. Need to move away from this sort of publicly led R&D. I think it's very understandable and probably even defensible to do what Russia has done, to try to use the state to break out of some of these sort of traps that, because of the dependence on natural resources, you needed to maybe use the government's ability to centralize resources to try to kickstart innovation. Unfortunately, the outcome is not very good, and we looked in this review that we did for the government, we looked at all the large, Rosnano, the Skolkovo, the Russia Venture Company and so on, all those initiatives, and they all seem to be quite flawed. They were often good ideas from the beginning, but the problem was that they brought in state, but they did not, were not able to bring along private investors. So, for example, if you look at the Russian Venture Company, this was an idea that came from Israel. It had worked very well in Israel, so the Israeli government put a lot of money up in what they call a funds of funds. These are funds for funds that want to stimulate innovation. And over time in Israel, this was privatized, so sold off to private investors. Unfortunately, in Russia, only the first part happened, only the state money came in, and it's proven very difficult to bring in private investors, also, both at the funds, in the individual funds, but also at the level of the fund of fund. So I think there is here much more emphasis need to be put to bring in private sector into this. And support entry of foreign firms, again, important. Here is it's probably not the best illustration, but what's important when you look at innovation is that you need funding at all the different stages. And of course, these different initiatives of the government was meant to try to build this, what you call the innovation ladder, or to build every step and make sure that there was sort of a state initiative for each level. And Rosnano, for example, was supposed to deal with the gap between seed finance and later stage finance. Unfortunately, it did so at very high cost and also with, it seems today, not a very good portfolio. So here is just to show that access to finance has improved, including in the regions, but it's still very difficult to find early stage financing. And here are the different state-led initiatives. The problem with them is that they have been important in kickstarting innovation finance, but what's now missing is this need to crowd in private capital, to bring in private capital both at the level of individual investment, but also at the level of the company itself. So Rosnano, for example, now is looking for co-investors in its structure. The problem is that it seems like the portfolio is not very attractive for an outsider to come in, and also the overhead costs. You've seen that they have now reduced their labor force quite a lot to try to become more efficient and more attractive for a private investor to come in. Here, I won't go through this. This is all different ideas or different policies to finance innovation. You know, small research grants, have grants for entrepreneurs, independent agency with private participation. You know, have serious evaluation of initiatives and making sure that these evaluations lead to improvements over time. So let me just summarize with this. So if you look at the results of all these efforts and all this talk about diversification, is unfortunately so far not very encouraging. These ambitious state-led initiatives are very well, you can understand why they were taken. You can see why that they have had some impact, but they are still not producing the results we want. They need to be complemented by very strong horizontal policies. So we call those sort of vertical policies when the state goes in and focuses on specific sectors, specific problems. The horizontal policies are about competition, about improving institution, business environment, enforcement. That's where the emphasis has to be. Strengthen competition, promote exports, attract foreign investors and entrants, improve educational outcomes, building a broader skill base that's better suited to industry. Strengthen policy framework for innovation. So there is a policy framework, it just needs to be reinforced, and crowd in private capital. So a lot of demands, and of course here it's easy to say all these things, and we have just tried to indicate some levers that you can push, but what is in the end probably the most important thing was when I spoke about the need to create more transparency around government, both at the level of the federal government and at the regional level, and really make sure that, you know, when initiatives are taken, they are monitored carefully. It's obvious or easy for voters to determine whether they have been successful or not, and you can then use your vote to try to influence policymakers to improve what they're doing.